All right, so welcome to AWS 101, an introduction to core AWS services. We are recording this to post on YouTube, so please take a moment to like and comment and subscribe. My name is Robert Chen. I work at Thorn Technologies. I just want to, use this talk not really to teach you a ton about AWS, but really to give you my personal perspective on AWS. So I've been to a bunch of meetups, and like if you go to the ones in Northern Virginia, there's a lot of focus on system administration, OpsWorks. Depending on who's hosting the meetup and who's presenting, they're going to be presenting on whatever's in their wheelhouse. But AWS is really broad. They cover a lot of different services, both for developers and system administrators. My personal background, I started out as a sysadmin, became a web admin, and then became a mobile developer, and now I'm circling back to a sort of a DevOps role. So I've seen a little bit of both sides, and so this talk is really my perspective from, I guess, both system administration and developer backgrounds. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little overview of AWS. I'm going to cover just real lightly some of the services, and then maybe focus a little bit more on what I think are the core services. After that, I'm going to do a couple of quick labs, if you're familiar with it. Well, if you're not, then you'll get to see how Quick Labs works. It's a really good tool for learning and experimentation. And then I'm going to finish off, if we have time, with a little primer on certification. So I love taking certs and bragging to my coworkers that I have more certs than they do. So I'm going to, I do have the first 3 associate certifications, and I'm working on my first pro cert, but I'll share with you like the approach that I use, what I think works and what doesn't work. Okay, so what is AWS? This is an intro level talk, so I'll back up even before AWS. What is the cloud? So the cloud is basically someone else's server in someone else's data center. They manage all the infrastructure. It's something that you don't have access to. It's abstracted away from you. So it's a little ethereal in that it's the cloud. But at the end of the day, it's still a server, no matter how magical the servers might seem. So what is AWS? AWS stands for Amazon Web Services. They don't just sell books or sell everything that you buy. They also are really good as a cloud provider. They're actually one of the best ones out there. What's special about AWS is that they have these additional value-added managed services on top of their virtual infrastructure. So we'll get into that a little bit more in the upcoming slides. So the benefits of AWS. As a cloud provider, it's night and day from the days when you used to have to order a server for $3,000, wait for it to arrive, you rack it, you got to configure it. With AWS, you could spin up a server in the amount of time it takes to make a coffee, and the server itself is going to cost less than the K-cup that you threw away. So it's really fast and convenient. They use a pricing model that's really nice. It's elastic, scalable, utility. So it basically means if you're going to experiment on a database for the afternoon, you could spin it up, use it for like 2 hours, get charged a couple bucks, and then shut it back down. You don't need like a 1-year term agreement. You only pay for the amount of time that you used. High availability and security. So if you're working on enterprise applications or with the government, it's really important that your apps be enterprise level. So high availability, you need it needs to be co-located just in case like an entire data center shuts down because of the thunderstorm, that app has to stay up. Globalization, if you need to reach like Southeast Asia, AWS could help you do that. Security and governance, it costs a lot of money to secure your data center, have those little badges to make sure that only people who are allowed are let in. And then there's PCI compliance if you're doing credit card transactions. Everything on AWS is done really well. It's like world class, and it's even considered stronger than most on-prem data centers. AWS is also a market leader. If anyone remembers Parse from last year and migrating off of that. And it comes with a free tier for 1 year. If you're getting started with AWS and you're not really sure how to use it, you could always sign up for the free tier and just explore. And it doesn't cost you anything as long as you don't spin up anything too crazy. Okay, a little bit more on globalization and high availability. So with AWS, there's the concept of regions and availability zones. So a region is, each region is a distinct, separate, not really data center, but like region for lack of a better word. So like if one entire region goes down, like that crazy storm, it was like the derecho, it was like a hurricane in a horizontal line that took out like the entire East Coast. Like the West Coast region would be totally unaffected, or like the recent S3 outage that we had. If you had failover to Oregon, then your application would have stayed up. Availability zones, a little different from regions. AZs are distinct data centers within, say, like there might be one in Reston, there might be one maybe in Maryland. I don't know what their locations are, but usually you want, for high availability, to have your application spanning multiple availability zones. So if one were to go down because of a bad storm, the other one would take over. And if you were to do this on your own, like on-prem, it'd be really expensive to have mirror facilities. Okay, so overview of the different AWS services. So usually when you sign into AWS for the first time, you just see like this wall of a ton of icons, and it's sort of it's sort of intimidating, I guess. Like in my eyes, from my perspective, this is kind of what I see, like just a subset of all those icons. And well, anyway, I'll dig into them. So there's about a dozen different services here that I'm familiar with, at least, and I like to organize them into 3 different categories. The first row would be like the top shelf services, the services that get the most hype and media attention. The first 2 would be API Gateway and Lambda. Everyone is talking about serverless. Everyone's trying to use serverless. And serverless is basically just API Gateway to handle your REST endpoints, and Lambda to handle your compute. It's like Lambda is like a application container. You could deploy your application that's stateless, and then it'll just deploy it and scale it as needed. So anyway, that's serverless. Lex, which is pretty new. If you're a tinkerer and you like to play with the newest, hottest technologies, Lex is the natural language processing that powers Alexa. If you've used it, let us know. Be interested to talk to you. Redshift is a data warehousing service. If you're working with big data, that's what you would use. Dan is like the master of Redshift. CloudFormation is scripted architecture. It takes care of all of your orchestration. Say if you have, your entire infrastructure in production, and then you are rolling out a new feature, and then you want a QA tier, you could use CloudFormation to just bring up the entire infrastructure of QA, do your testing, and then spin it back down. CloudFormation is kind of, it gets a little involved working with it, but once you put in the time to set everything up with CloudFormation, it could be pretty powerful. So anyway, that's the top shelf specialty services. You may or may not be using them depending on what you're doing. The next row is like what I call the enterprise services. So anytime you have an application that needs to be enterprise level with all that high availability, scalability, all that good stuff, you're probably going to be dealing with these services. The first two, RDS and DynamoDB, they're your managed database services. RDS is going to be your MySQL, and Dynamo is going to be your NoSQL. Route 53 is your DNS. It's not just like GoDaddy where you get a domain name. You could also do load balancing and failover with it. Elastic Beanstalk is pretty cool. It might not be as popular as Lambda is now, but Elastic Beanstalk was pretty popular, and it's still really useful. What it does is if you have an application that needs to be load balanced, and then you need to scale it out horizontally with an auto-scaling group, and then if you need a database on the back end, Elastic Beanstalk will take care of all of that for you, and then they have a really easy-to-use web interface just to configure all the settings. Elastic Beanstalk is actually using CloudFormation on the back end behind the scenes, so it's pretty powerful if you want to scale out your application without digging into the nitty-gritty of ELB and ASG. SNS, it's push notifications, but for an enterprise application, within your code, you're going to be making SNS calls. If something goes wrong, I want to send a message to my developer or engineers just to let them know that something is amiss. So those are the enterprise level applications. There's a lot more, but these are just the ones that are representative, I guess, in my eyes. Now we're going to get down to the core services. What I think of as core as, no matter what you're doing, you're probably going to run into these services. These are almost like prerequisites for doing anything in AWS. So even if you're just doing a serverless application with Lambda, API, gateway, your code is going to be deployed up to S3 anyway. So you kind of have to know these. S3, EC2, VPC, CloudWatch, and IAM. So I'm going to dig into each one of these core services in a moment. Okay, so S3, it stands for Simple Storage Service. Basically what S3 is used for is mainly used for durable storage. So if you have data and you don't want to lose it, you put it on S3. So if you have an application that wants to talk to another application and they need to store state somewhere outside of both applications, you put it on S3. It's durable. You're not going to lose it. That's what S3 is designed for. It's got 11.9's durability, which means if you put something on S3, they're not going to lose it for the most part. Now availability, S3 could be down, but your data is still going to be there. It's object-based storage, so you're uploading discrete files. You're not going to be executing applications or putting like a temp disk up there. Like it's the files. It's like Dropbox. S3 uses a concept called a bucket, which is a container that you use for namespacing. It's different from a folder in that You could namespace it. And you could also attach a policy to a bucket, and that policy will apply to every single object inside instead of individually applying it to each sub-object. I went over the persistent durable storage layer earlier. You could also use it to serve out web assets, which is what I've been doing day in and day out for the past week or two with scalable WordPress. So you can actually use S3 as a cheap CDN. And you could host a website on S3, and then you could hook it into CloudFront as well. So that's S3 in a nutshell. EC2. EC2 stands for Elastic Cloud Compute. These are basically your VMs. You can choose from different Linux flavors or Windows. In my opinion, I think it's best to use Amazon Linux. It's based off of CentOS. I like it because I learned Linux on Red Hat, so I have my preferences with Amazon Linux anyway. A lot of people like to use Ubuntu, but in general, I think it's best to use Amazon Linux. It's just designed to work within AWS. Two concepts that are important with EC2, and they're related to security. So anytime you're creating your own server, like if you have Windows Server on your machine at home, by default, it's not secure. It's got like a default administrator password or even like a blank administrator password. So what do you do when you create a brand new vulnerable server and then you have to access it over the internet? Whoever hits it first is basically going to get in. So what Amazon does is they use key pairs. Key pairs are public and private key. When you create the server, even before it's launched for the first time, they bake in those keys, and only the person with the private key can log in. And that even includes AWS. If you lose your private key, even AWS is unable to get into your server. You got to delete it and generate a new key and create a new server. So it's pretty secure, even on first launch. Another important concept with EC2 is security groups. So if you've used EC2 before, you probably ran into security groups before. The idea behind security groups is usually when you're hacking into a network, right? You get past the firewall, and then once you're inside the network, then you start port scanning everyone. So AWS's security model is that we don't want you to have access to everything when you get past the doorman. So every single server is going to have its own firewall wrapper, if you will, which will only whitelist which ports it's allowed to communicate on. So even if you get in, you can't port scan everyone up and down. You're only going to hit like 80 or 22 or whatever. So key pairs, security groups, we're going to run into these two things in the lab later on. Okay, VPC. VPC is all of your networking stuff. Depending on your background, you may or may not be familiar with like classful private IP ranges, your 10 dot whatever, 172, 192. Well, usually your home network is 192.168. So they give you all those private ranges that you can use for your own private network. You can configure route tables, private IP ranges. So NAT gateways and internet gateways. So VPC, in order to communicate in and out, you're going to use what's called a gateway. So if you have a private subnet, you're going to use a NAT gateway that lets you reach out to the internet. If you have a public subnet, like your web server, where you're going to put your web server on, that's going to have an internet gateway. So it allows access out, and the internet could reach you as well. And then not listed here is like a virtual private gateway if you're doing a VPN connection. So VPC, it can get pretty deep, depending on what you're doing. And then there's the concept of elastic IP, which you'll see a lot when you're working with EC2 instances. It's basically a static IP. It's pretty crazy to think that you would get your own IPv4 address nowadays, but they give you one if you set the flag for elastic IPs. And so anytime you have a web server, if you shut it down, you're going to lose your IP, and it's going to be a different IP. So in order to do any type of like DNS, like thorntech.com goes to this IP address, you need an elastic IP if it's going to be a web server. Okay, CloudWatch. CloudWatch is your centralized logging. If you're using an EC2 instance and then there's something wrong with Apache, you just go into Apache logs. But a lot of these AWS services are not going to be on a single EC2 instance. So you need to get the logs somehow. What they do is they just centralize all the logs into CloudWatch. So if you're troubleshooting a Lambda, why is my Lambda not firing? Go into CloudWatch. They have logs there. They also have metrics. You could check out your performance for your EC2 instances. You could set alarms for when your memory utilization is reaching 90% for over a minute. They could send an SNS message, text you that your server is dying. Yeah, so that's CloudWatch. And the last core service I'm going to cover is IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. It's your basic user groups and passwords. If you use AWS, they have this thing called multi-factor authentication, MFA. It's basically, you're basically going to use Google Authenticator. Every time you log in, you also have to open up Google Authenticator. There's a 6-digit number that rotates that you have to type in so that people can't just brute force your password. This is where you set your permissions. Your permissions are going to go inside a document called a policy. And let's see. Okay, access keys in the CLI. If you are a sysadmin, most of your work is going to be in the AWS console, clicking around. But if you're a developer, you're going to, for the most part, use access keys, either via the command line or from your application. And you might not even log into the web console at all. So with IAM, you could set a login, access keys, one or both. And then roles. Roles are kind of interesting. In order for a server to access, say, S3, what you don't want to do is create a service account and then provision it, access keys, and then bake them into the server, and then via command line access the S3 bucket. That's like an anti-pattern. Instead, what you want to do is you want to create a role. A role is basically a user without a login. So if you have a server or a service that needs access to something else, that's where you're going to use a role. So roles are kind of like users, except not for people, for machines. Before I dive into the labs, are there any questions? All right, let's dive into the labs. Okay, so how many people here have used Quick Labs before? Okay, great. So Quick Labs, they're not part of AWS. I think they got purchased by Google Cloud. But it's a good training tool. They have a whole bunch of different labs that you could choose from. Some are free, some are pretty cheap. And you could play around within a real AWS console without messing up your own stuff. So they have a lot of labs to choose from, and each of them comes with a set of instructions. And the instructions are actually free to read. So if you don't want to pay for a $15 lab, you could just open it up, read the instructions, and step through the areas that you're interested in within your own free account. This is what Quick Labs looks like. You got your quests. They try to gamify it, I guess, but I always click on the Labs tab. And then we're going to go through 2 labs, one with S3, which is a free lab. You could go through it on your own time as well. And then there's one for EC2, which costs a credit. A credit is usually $1. Okay, so why don't we jump into the actual lab. So right now I'm on the Quick Labs website, and then I'm going to search for S3. So these are the instructions. It's really verbose. But basically what they're saying here is you're going to create a bucket, you're going to upload a file, create a folder, move the file, and delete everything. So I'll go ahead and start the lab. And since you're working in the AWS console, you're basically working in Chrome. So if you hit this Open Console button, it'll open up the lab in a new tab. And it's not going to work because I think I was logged into my own AWS account earlier. I need to sign out first. Okay, so I am in a Quick Labs provisioned AWS account. So this is a little playground. I could do whatever I want without breaking anything. So if I search for S3, and then if I hit create bucket, I could name a bucket. It has to be unique within the region, I think. So if I do Meetup, Thorn, Tech.
Or you have to be globally.
Yeah, buckets are regional, but the names have to be globally unique. Yeah, that sounds right. So I'll just put a really random number at the end to make sure that it's unique. I'm going to accept the defaults, region, settings, whatever. You do versioning, logging, and all that stuff. I'll skip it since this is just an introduction. So accept all the defaults. And now I have my own bucket. Okay, so now that I have my bucket, I'm going to upload a file. I clicked upload and then add files. And then I'm going to upload a little image that we were talking about earlier today. Next, and upload. Okay, so it's kind of like Dropbox. You just upload an image. There's not really much to it. You could create folders. My folder. And then you can move objects into the folder. So I hit cut, and then within the folder, I just hit paste. So it's pretty simple. And then after you're done, you can just hit delete bucket, and then it's going to make sure that that's really what you want to do. So you got to actually type in the name of the bucket to delete it. And I don't know, that's pretty much it. It's pretty simple. A lot of these quick labs takes a while to read through, but when you actually go through it, it only takes like 3 minutes to do. Okay, so this is basically what we just did. We created a bucket, created a file, a folder, and then we deleted everything. So there's also another lab for EC2. Instead of going through the steps of the lab, I'll just run through spinning up an EC2 server in a real account. So I'm going to log out of here first. Okay, so I'm going to sign into our own company account. So thorntech.signin.aws.amazon.com. So it's going to ask for an MFA code. So I actually have to open up Google Authenticator and then copy and paste the 6-digit number. So let's see. Okay, and then I'm going to do everything in Oregon because I don't want to accidentally delete our website. I'm going to spin up an EC2 instance. This is something that's pretty common to do. So right now, there are no running instances. I'm going to launch a new one. And you have all these different OSs to choose from. They put Amazon Linux at the top, which is what I use anyway. There's also AWS Marketplace if you're looking for a special solution. But for the purposes of this demo, we'll just use Amazon Linux. There's different tiers where you could have more memory, more CPU. I'm just going to use T2 Micro. It's just a demo. Okay, so on this configuration page, you're going to have a bunch of different settings. Usually, you would be configuring, like, you're going to drop it into a private subnet. You probably already have an IAM role. But for now, we'll just skip this and just run through the wizard. Let's do that. Okay, so when you get to the end, there's going to be a launch button. And if you hit launch, you're going to get this screen where it says you need to provide a key pair to lock it down. So let's just assume that I don't have one. So I'll create a new key pair, and we'll call it Meetup Demo, and then download it, and then launch it. So it's going to take a few moments for the server to spin up. And then in the meantime, I'm going to take a look at this key that I downloaded. So is everyone able to see that? Okay, so I'm just creating, actually, that didn't work. Okay, I just created a folder just to put everything in, and then I'm going to move my key pair into here. Okay, so right now I have a folder called Meetup, and then I have the key pair meetupdemo.pem. So let's see. Looks like the server is up, and here's the public IP address. So to SSH into it, you just do SSH. The username for Amazon Linux is EC2 user, and then the IP address. So it's going to deny me because I don't have a public key. So I actually need to provide the public key file that I downloaded. But it's not going to let me because the permissions on the key are too loose. So if you look at the permissions on the key, it's going to be in Linux speak 644. You don't want to make it readable to anyone except for myself. So you just lock down the permissions a little bit. So only myself can read and write, and nobody else can do anything. And then we'll try it again. So that's basically how you would log into EC2. This type of thing you would do day in and day out. So once you're in your EC2 instance, you could do a couple of things. You could do a yum update to run all of your updates. You could install a web server. Thank you. Okay, and then the location of the document root is var www html, and then you just create an index.html file. Hang on, it's not good. I think I need to be root to do that. Okay, so I should be able to hit this this index.html file if I paste in the IP address.
Your security group will do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was on purpose.
Okay.
So I mentioned before that in order to access your server, you need to create a whitelist of ports that you want to open up. So as you astutely observed, I need to open up port 80 on the security group. So you go into security groups. I should probably do this from the EC2 instance. Okay, so I guess they call it Launch Wizard 2. And then you just add a couple of inbound rules. Okay, so it should take a few moments for these settings to apply. And then hopefully it'll work. Oh, do I? Yeah. I do. Thank you. Okay, so probably should have started Apache before I tested the security group thing. So, live demos. Well, anyway, that's just, that's EC2 in a nutshell. We went over creating the instance, opening up the port on the security group, and a little bit of configuration. Okay, Does anyone have any questions at this point?
Yeah, I have a question. So earlier you loaded your little image on the S3 storage. How much storage could you get away on just the EC2 image? You know, if you're just doing developmental work, web server, or whatever, you know, how much could you get away? Because there is some disk space on the EC2 image, right? So, I mean, like, when would you need when can you not get away without paying for the S3 storage for web use, developmental use?
So is the question about what storage limits are within the free tier for EC2 or S3?
Well, I mean, I know you can add a disk to the EC2, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, so, like, first for developing a website or hosting a website, when do you can get away from not using an S3 bucket? You know, and just do it on the EC2 image?
Well, I think for most websites, you'd probably want to start with just EC2 and have all the images stored locally.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
And then if you wanted the durability, like if say you didn't want to keep making backups of that EC2 instance all the time, you could actually host those image assets on S3 and offload them, and then point everything to S3 instead.
Okay.
Is that the question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know when I needed S3 or not, and then when I could get away without using S3. Yeah, you know, as long as you're not worried about the reliability and accessibility of it, right? Like having it lose that image.
Yeah. Like unless you have a good backup plan, if you lose that image, then all of your assets are gone. So I'm actually working on a scalable WordPress stack, if you will. What I'm doing is I'm taking the WordPress server, and then there's usually an uploads folder that has all the static images. I upload that to S3, and then I rewrite all the database links to point to that S3 hostname. And so all the images are on S3. And that way you could actually scale out the EC2 instance because there's no state on each individual server. But you don't have to do that. It's something that's nice to do, though.
I was just going to add that, like, you know, part of using EC2 and AWS is sort of like a mentality shift. So like, what Amazon wants you to do is kind of think of EC2 instances as temporary. Like, you shouldn't rely, I mean, you can. I mean, we do it all the time. We have servers that run for months and at a time. But really, you should be prepared at any moment those servers can go down and another one will just come up and take its place. And so if you're storing, you know, critical files on those instances, you, like Rob said, you should have a backup plan in place, like sync it to S3. S3 is the durable, you know, storage, where EC2 is more of it's like a temporary compute instance, really. It's kind of it's a different change of mentality than just, you know, the old days where you buy, you know, a server and it's yours forever. And it's, you know, these two instances are really meant to kind of come and go, and you plan your application around that.
System storage. Yeah. Oh, it's cheap. Oh, it works out to be cheap.
Yeah.
You get something for free. It's just an app there. Some scratch based.
Right. Like when you launch an EC2 instance, you can choose like a 500 gigabyte disk to attach if you want to, but that's going to be very expensive actually. They'll charge you a lot of money for that EBS volume. Amazon S3 is much cheaper.
Oh, yes.
Do you find yourself making a million S3 buckets, or you find yourself using very few buckets and just making a million folders?
Ooh, guess it depends what you want to do. I think it's better to keep the number of buckets, keep the count low, only because if you're like scrolling through pages of buckets. But then again, it depends what you want to do. If each bucket has like a ton of files, it's going to be really difficult to search through all those files. Dan, any thoughts on that?
The bucket permissions and folder permissions, you can set permissions on individual folders. just as you would for a bucket, so it doesn't really make a difference in that case. But like with buckets, like they have to be globally unique names. So with folders, it doesn't matter. It's already inside the bucket. So you have more flexibility in naming inside the bucket.
Yeah, I mean, currently we have pretty much a single bucket with everything in it, and I just didn't know if there was any particular reason why splitting into multiple buckets would advantageous.
We normally do it for like logical reasons. Like,
Yeah.
we'll have like the type of thing that we normally store on S3 are like log files. I mean, log files are great because, we have compliance reasons. We need to keep a record of everything that happens. So you put it on S3. You can actually, even from S3, you can designate it that you want to become Glacier, which puts it into like long-term temporary storage. Actually, like, maybe you can put it on tape or something like that, But, so log files are great for S3. Server configurations and even like JSON configuration files are great for S3. So we put, we have different buckets for, server configs, or different buckets for log files, different buckets, and then also Amazon will create buckets for you sometimes for some of the things that they do. Like if you do Elastic Beanstalk, and you in the Elastic Beanstalk settings you choose, save my log files. They will create a bucket for you, and then they will create a ton of different log files and things like that. So I mean, we don't have a ton of buckets, but most of it's folders, I would say.
So lifecycle management per bucket basis. So if you have a different kind of schedule that you want to put things off onto Glacier or what have you, this again, it's in the bucket. But the other thing is to minimize the number of buckets saves you a little bit of money because cost per storage is done on a per gigabyte basis per bucket. So if you have a lot of little buckets, you get a rounding error. So in general, minimize the number of buckets unless you have a different lifecycle policy.
That's good.
I think you can share buckets too. Per bucket basis with different users. So if you want something to share with other S3 users or other AWS users, that would be done on a per bucket as a per file basis.
But also, like in Rob's example, like we're serving static like images and web assets from an S3 bucket. So that whole entire bucket is got permission for the world to view. And so we obviously don't want them to see the log files. So each bucket has different security permissions.
Okay, so the last part of this presentation is a little primer on certification. Oh, sorry.
I got one final question about, there's some stuff in the API about setting like backup strategies on a prefix match basis. Does that basically treat the folders as like a path, and you can match on like a non-folder boundary level and make any kind of regex that matches file name? Paths.
I'm not so sure about the regex, but so the bucket is the overall container, and then you have these subfolders, but the folders are actually a lie. They're actually just a part of the path.
Okay.
So if you do /myfolder /file.txt, the name of file.txt is actually /myfolder /file.txt, whatever. And then it just presents whatever your folder separator is. If you define it as / or ampersand or whatever you define it as, it will just parse it in the web console for you as a folder. But the regex part, I do not know.
Yeah, they have really good filters for like including stuff or excluding stuff, and then you can just really narrow it down. So you can like exclude everything, but only include my backup files, or the other way around.
That's a good point. It wasn't clear to me whether folders were real or not.
Yeah, they're a lie.
Are you able to elaborate further on use cases for elastic load balance, ELB, elastic load balancing? Because I'm trying to understand whether that is really just to be in front of like web portals, or whether I could use it for routing traffic between two third-party hosted images that are riding on EC2s that are like two firewalls, and I can route traffic to either one or not. Is that not a use case, and is ELB just for web, 443 and 480 traffic level stuff, what can you use it for?
Ooh, that sounds like a complicated question.
Yeah, it's a complicated question. I don't know the answer. I haven't asked AWS before.
Well, we might have, we might cover ELB in a future meetup or future talk. But from what I know about ELB, it comes in two flavors. One is classic, and the other one is application ELB.
Oh, okay.
Classic is like the simple version, where it just does dumb load balancing. It might use like a session cookie, but that's about it. The application load balancer, you could bake in specialized logic. So if you have like a web application that uses like a socket or something, you could do like specialized stuff with the application load balancer. The limits, I'm not really sure the details of your specific situation, but there are limits to ELB in that they're confined to the region. So if you want to do load balancing between here and Oregon, you can't do it with the ELB.
Just within the region.
Okay, yeah.
Within an availability set.
So,
Within a VPC. Between appliances.
okay.
The load balance appliances is what I'm trying to find out.
Okay. I think when I was reading up on it, the approach was start with classic. If classic can't do what you need, then fall back to application.
I mean, you can choose other TCP ports, as long if that's what you're trying to do.
That's what I'm trying to
Yeah.
wonder.
You can choose other ports besides 80 or 40.
If you're sending traffic this way or that way based on a criteria.
Well, no, I don't think you can base it on criteria, like Rob said.
Use application.
Yeah, the application level one, you can say, like, if it matches this pattern, then go to this one, otherwise, but that one.
And ideally, it would be like send the traffic here until some threshold of traffic is reached, and then send the other, load balancing.
So that's if you do that for socket basis like round robin. That's not a problem. And the core use case for classic load balancing is like you know when you're saturated, you know when to split up your mixes. Normally those ports to the load balancers are going to be encrypted anyway, so there's not a lot to go on in terms of beyond round robin. Sometimes they'll do like the SSL ID session ID. But could, I guess, that theory do something like look inside if you had unencrypted HTTP traffic? I think you could do load balancing based on like the HTTP session ID. If you want to have sticky sessions, that's not a good design anyway.
Yeah, well, I mean, the real problem is if you're doing infrastructure as a service and you're hosting to appliances, right, and you've got to route the traffic to either one based on load, and if the ELB can't do, because you're not really using Amazon Web Server, you're hosting something. You're hosting a third-party appliance, right? So how do you direct the traffic to one appliance to the other? Or another service that I'm not thinking about.
We could probably discuss it more in depth after the talk. It sounds like a pretty interesting problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Robin, the traffic, going on. So basically, it's done at the lowest.
Okay, so the last part of the talk is going to cover certification, if you're interested in it. So certifications are nice. It gives you a little bit of credibility. Sometimes your employer might require it. This is the general certification path. There's 3 associate level exams and 2 professional level ones. There's a couple of specialized certs, but I think they're in beta or they just came out. They're pretty tough, I hear. There are prerequisites to the professional in that I think you need to take the Certified Solutions Architect Associate before you could take the professional version. But from my perspective, and also from what I've heard, you really want to just get all of them, and in this particular order. The reason why is they all overlap each other in content. And also, each one of these helps you study for the next one in series. So it kind of makes sense. Instead of jumping into the CDA, you kind of want to take the CSA first to help you study for the CDA. I started studying for the associate exams using this website called A Cloud Guru. I went on Stack Social, and then they had this deal, which doesn't happen all the time, where I got like the 3 associate training bundles for like $20 for like all 3. I think they charged like $70 for all 3 retail. So if you want to hold out for a sale on Stack Social, you can. Otherwise, just pay for them as you go, I guess. This is the same content as Ryan Cronenberg's Udemy course. But if you go with A Cloud Guru, it's kind of nice because they do all of this within Lambda, so you can kind of see how they're doing stuff, like as a user. And also, they have practice questions. I don't know if Udemy has the practice questions, but they have the practice questions here, and they're pretty useful for studying for the exam. Supplemental materials. This book came out after I got my certification, so I don't know if it's worth it or not. If you buy it, let me know how it goes.
It's okay.
It is good?
Yeah, I don't think you need it though. The A-Cloud Guru stuff is the best.
Yeah? Nice.
Amazon's got a lot of resources itself too.
Perfect transition. So, Amazon's got a lot of resources themselves too. If you go to their official certification page, they have a tab for each individual certification and a bunch of steps, like you should go to formal on-site training, stuff like that. The most important points to glean from their page is that each exam has a list of white papers, so it's worth it to start reading them now. Some of them are very long, like, I don't know, 50 pages, even more. For the first CSA associate exam, I wouldn't say that you have to read all the white papers, even though that's the one with the most white papers on it. I actually somehow squeaked by on that exam without reading a single white paper. But it's important to read those white papers because as you progress through the exams, they get harder and harder, and you will need to read those white papers if you haven't. This webpage also has links to different FAQs. Depending on the exam, they might ask you to read the FAQs on, like, I don't know, CloudFront or whatever. FAQs are pretty quick to read through. AWS has their own official practice questions for $20. Never paid for it, but I might try it if I fail my next exam. And then read the docs. So I used A Cloud Guru at first, and it was great because he kind of coaches you toward the questions that are actually on the exam. But as you progress through, at least I found that he's really just teaching you answers to look for on the exam, but you actually have no idea what you're doing. So it's kind of important to read those white papers, especially as you get further along, and to read the official documentation. So for the pro cert I'm working on, I printed out a 300-page CloudFormation, like the documentation, and I'm slowly working my way through. But the further you go, the more difficult the questions get, and you really need to know your stuff. Other supplemental materials, linuxacademy.com I hear is really good. I haven't tried it, but I am going to use it for my next exam, only because I kind of feel like I'm not getting everything I need from A Cloud Guru. Quick Labs, they have a lot of labs. That AWS webpage also lists quick labs that are applicable to that specific certification. They're really, it doesn't take that much time. It's like 2 or 3 labs. These are sort of tangential, but they're kind of nice. Like if you go jogging in the morning or you're on the metro, you can actually listen to reInvent on a podcast without watching the actual video. And there's also an AWS podcast where they go over various topics. This is a find that I ran into yesterday. It was awesome. This start.j Cole Morrison, I'll go to it now. It's so good. Like IAM is probably one of the more confusing articles out there, and he has this article called I Am Confused that like just explains everything really well. After I found this article and I slacked it to Dan, I went home and then I was checking Twitter, and AWS retweeted one of his other articles, so I think he's pretty legit. Hands-on, if you're just studying for the certifications but you're not following along with the videos, you should at least follow along, and it might help to do your own hands-on pet project. Let the hands learn the commands type of thing. And oh gosh. And this should be up here. And we do training. So if you're interested in training, we started doing that recently as well.
What does your training do that you don't get from the quick labs, or can you just describe more about your training?
Okay. We did a training recently. It's similar to like a AWS Essentials type of course. It doesn't prep you for a specific certification per se, but we go over. We have a certain curriculum of different quick labs like S3, EC2, ELB, auto-scaling groups, RDS, Dynamo, and all that, and then we just run through how would you use them in like real-life architectures, and we also walk you through the quick labs as well as supplemental material.
Yeah, I'd say the thing that really is kind of different about the way we approach training is that we've done enough actual deployments where we have some really cool live, like actual architectures that we walk through and show you, hey, look, here's how we built this platform for this customer. And it has private subnets, public subnets, ELBs, and Dynamo, and all the different pieces, and we show how they actually work together and how a real deployed project works. So we kind of take it from the stance of real world examples.
I'll just point out that if nothing else, it's worth going to ACloud and just looking at the course outline, because it will show you the order in which you want to tackle the various subsections if you want to just read the white paper. So I'll start you with, like, the first thing you want to look at is IAM, because you'll need that in order to get started. And that's not immediately obvious when you first hit the console.
Yeah, excellent.
As far as the actual exams itself, is it really, like, if you have a hand-on good grasp of doing the labs in the cert, in the training, is the test pretty much do this, create an instance, is it pretty much repeat of a hands-on lab but with no instruction?
I wouldn't say that. I think there's like different types of questions. There's a troubleshooting category of questions where, like, how would you approach this issue? They will have questions that point out like default settings, or like just to see if you know it off the top of your head. They might ask about limitations for different, like a really good example, for ELB, can you do a cross-region? That would be one of the assumptions in the question. And of course you can't, so yeah.
It's not multiple choice. There's no like actual logging in results.
Right, but it's not a single multiple choice where it's A, B, C, or D. They give you A, B, C, D, E, and F and choose 2. So the odds are not great.
And they're not like super easy alternative answers. It's not like what is 5 plus 5? 10, blue, cat, and anti-disestablishmentarianism. It's like you want to have 3 servers always available. Which one of these 6 configurations would be always available?
Yeah, they have really good wrong answers. That sounds right. A lot of good trick questions. So, you really need to know your stuff, I think.
It's not an A+, if anybody took that. It's not just a simple, it's not the hardest exam on the world, but I did the architecture one, which I did it too, which is pretty comprehensive. But it's not an A+, it's not a net plus, it's not the easy stuff, not to beat up on CompTIA. But
For CompTIA.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I think Cloud Guru claims that the development one is the easiest. And you're saying that the architecture one, solutions architect, is the first one you should take.
Well,
so I'm kind of curious on how you feel about that.
So I kind of glazed over these real quick. So the CSA, Solutions Architect Associate, is almost like the AWS 101, where it's just a really shallow overview of almost like every single service, like Snowball. I can't think of any other ones, VPC and all that. And then the CDA, they get into stuff that a developer would tend to use. Like sometimes I really hate their questions. They would like nitpick a specific API call and ask you what is the exact syntax for this property. It's like really? But this is more focused on like developer type services. But it's helpful to have like a grid first before you dive into the CDA. Okay, last slide. So the logistics of scheduling an exam, I mean, you may have taken like A+ certs, Red Hat certs, like SAN certs. So this is going to be a little more difficult than CompTIA, but it's not crazy like a Red Hat cert or anything. So it's very doable. You just schedule an exam on that prior AWS, like these are the things you should do to prep. There's a link all the way at the bottom that will take you to Web Assessor, which will say Criterion on the top, where you could register for an exam. It's $150 for the associate, $300 for the professional. You have to, for some reason, like print out your auth code. You can't just like show it to them, I guess. So I get to the exam, I leave my phone in the car, because like you're not allowed to bring in your phone. I get there, and then they're like, "Where's the printout of your auth code?" It's like, I'll go get my phone and show it to you. You need to print it out. So I have to go on their like public computer with like my Gmail password. Like hopefully no one hacks into it. Anyway, the auth code is important. Phoenix testing services over by Columbia Mall. That's where I go. It's close. And then once you're done, then you add it to your LinkedIn profile, and then recruiters asking for LDAP engineers start contacting you. Yes?
How often do you brag to your coworkers?
Twice during the presentation.
That's what we brought you guys here for.
This is all a ruse just to get you there.
I hit the ground running with the first 2 because I just signed up for a Cloud Guru. It's like, I got to watch these videos. And then I got 2 within the span of like 2 months. And then after that, it's like, ooh, like I'm kind of sick of stuttering. So I didn't get the next one for like another like year. Slowly chewing through the Pro Cert. Any questions?
Thank you.
Nope. Thank you.